Squidward, the Attack on Titan anime is finally coming to an end this year. Yeah, Squidward. Yeah, Squidward. Yeah, Squidward. Yeah, Squidward.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to my Attack on Titan anime retrospective. Okay, now, if you have not watched the videos on the previous seasons, or even watched the anime or read the manga,
what's wrong with you?
Not only am I going to be talking about major spoilers for this season, but how this season in particular really solidified Attack on Titan as one of the greatest fictional stories ever told in modern media. Now, before you get your One Pieces, Bleaches, and Jujutsu Kaisens in a twist, I said one of, because I haven't seen those yet. But I have seen Asha no Jo, and the emotions I felt when watching that and Attack on Titan were pretty close to each other. Before I go on about where we left off in the story, I want to set the stage for it first. Viewership for the latter half of Attack on Titan Season 3 brought the series to new heights, and this is despite the troubled production Wit had to endure, which led to the season getting split in half, each being released a year apart from one another. But even then, Season 3's production was pretty tight, especially given the touch-ups made to the Blu-ray release afterwards. And with where the manga was at this point, where it was heading, and already have to deal with such a production, Wit decided that it would no longer continue to produce Attack on Titan. Thus, a studio change was called to order, in which no other studio wanted anything to do with Attack on Titan. The manga was proven to be just that ambitious. Keep in mind, there was a 4-year gap between seasons 1 and 2 solely because Wit wanted to fully prepare to adapt the latter. Season 1 had a last-minute recap episode halfway through, and like Season 3, had major touch-ups for its Blu-ray. Plus, the live-action adaptation that was planned in 2011 and slated for 2013 saw several delays as the original director left in 2012, only for a new one to be placed in 2013, with shooting not being until 2014, and then the project was finally released in 2015. But more on that another time. I hope you're ready for that one, Cole.
What?
After Production IG scoured studio after studio, they finally came to an agreement with one, MAPPA. At this point, MAPPA was rather known for their animated outings of the Garo series and adaptations like Banana Fish, but they exploded in 2020 thanks to Dorohedoro, The God of High School, Jujutsu Kaisen, and Attack on Titan. And that's not even all their projects from that year, so the fact that they decided to go with it anyway was pretty wild, but also concerning. It's been a hot topic that the animation industry is tired. Everyone is overworked, underpaid, yet are still expected to meet harsh deadlines. So rather than working in a production where everything to the last detail is perfected, shortcuts are taken, such as the omission of certain but small scenes from the manga, and the use of filters that make adding lines easier, as well as outsourcing animation from different countries and the extensive use of 3D animation, which all amounts to MAPPA just working with what they can get. Needless to say, Attack on Titan the final season's production was even more troublesome than before. Staff wasn't chosen based on expertise, but whoever they could get. But hey, this led to a lot of freelance animators getting work, so that's a big plus. Directorial efforts were passed from Tetsuro Araki to Yuichiro Arashi, while character designs went from Kyoji Asano to Tomohiro Kishi, who, I must say, does an amazing job adapting Isayama's art here, as it is a lot more faithful given the polished and consistent nature of his art. Unlike Isayama's earlier style, which was a bit of a trouble Asano faced through seasons 1 through 3, despite improving on them as the show went on. But even though Attack on Titan's final season's production was an absolute nightmare, how was it in the end? First, I want to talk about the opening. Whereas all the other openings were colorful and bombastic, this one opts for something more muted. And as opposed to action, we're treated with war imagery. It really helps set the stage for the tonal shift we're about to experience, as Attack on Titan is not so much about fighting monsters and government conspiracies, it's about war. Set 4 years after the haunting secret of the Titans and the world at large was revealed to our characters and that unsettling cliffhanger, we start Season 4 outside the walls from the perspective of a new group of characters, being those who fight for the nation of Marley, who not only drops an airstrike of Titans, but Reiner and Zeke as well, plus the introduction of a new Jaw Titan as well as the Cart Titan from last season. This ends up in a major victory for Marley and everyone goes back home to celebrate. And right off the bat, I just want to say, seeing everything from a completely different perspective really adds to that reveal at the end of Season 3. We really get an idea of what the world is like outside Paradise Island and what's been going on. We also get more insight on who it is that committed such atrocities on Paradise and the Eldians to begin with, plus the politics, xenophobia, and nationalism rooted within. And we see how this side of the world affects this new cast we follow, as brainwashing and propaganda have clearly gone rampant to the point of child recruitment, and that you are deemed crazy simply for wrongthink, for lack of a better term. But at the same time, we see this sort of humanization of these people. While they may be considered monsters, it isn't entirely their fault that they've been manipulated and taken advantage of at vulnerable points of their lives, as they were fed this ideology that they're the greatest and that everyone who is different from them is to be demonized. And at the same time, we see how different people deal with this. We see how Reiner was essentially exploited his whole life, with his parents never having his best interest in mind, only shaping it for him and telling him what his best interest is. And he totally buys into it. And seeing that on the other side of this war were people just like him really messed him up. Him, Annie, and Berthold are responsible for the deaths of countless soldiers and innocent people, and all they ever did was just follow orders. We see the displeasure in their actions, which adds more weight upon revisiting the prior seasons. Most notably, the 3 watching Marco get eaten alive after leaving him to die. And for some time, we do see everything from Reiner's POV, just seeing how he handles things at this point in his life, whether it's conversations with Zeke or how he interacts with his family and comrades, including his younger cousin Gabby, who we will get to in a bit. All of this then culminates in the eventual reunion of Reiner and Eren, who snuck into Marley under the guise of a homeless veteran as the two meet one another after 4 years in the midst of a declaration of war on Paradis. And it is at this point we finally see that both Eren and Reiner are not so different from one another after all. Growing up, they both sought a dream, one thought unattainable to the world around them, their parents doing everything they could to keep them in check, with their abilities being ultimately given to them in the end, having nothing to do with being born with natural gifts or anything of the matter. The only thing that sets them apart is that Eren wanted freedom from the shackles of the world around him, and Reiner wanted power to have agency over himself, all because the world made them feel powerless. It made them desperate and vowed to stop at nothing to get what they want, and fought for what they believed was for the good of humanity. For Eren, the liberation of the people of Paradis, and Reiner, the Iron Fist of Marley and its control. But only this time, the roles are reversed. After Eren tells Reiner everything he has seen and how he relates to him, he asks if he would be able to live with it like he has. All before committing an atrocity before him, where Eren devours a noble of the Tiber family and ruthlessly kills an entire crowd of people. Now, Eren has the very agency that Reiner sought for in a twisted perspective, leaving Reiner no choice but to fight for the freedom and safety of his own people. Having Eren be the new villain of the story was mind-blowing, but deep down, you kinda knew it was coming. With all the visions he had seen and how the world was never what he thought it was, Eren is now unleashing his anger and rage onto the world that trapped him and tortured his people. In case it wasn't obvious enough, this is an exact mirroring in scenario from Attack on Titan's very first episode, and this was the only way Eren's character would have progressed, by becoming the monster that he swore to destroy himself. And what follows is a truly wonderful action set piece that hits all the right notes for me. For starters, one may notice the aforementioned use of CG. While this was an element that has been criticized since the airing of the final season's first episode, I would go as far as to say that the way they incorporate CG is done very well. And that is thanks to how they have a layer of 2D animation over each model so that they blend into their environment almost seamlessly. Like, no disrespect to it, but you can't tell me this isn't an improvement over this. And people say the live action CG looks bad, but aside from that, we are introduced to the Warhammer Titan, who not only gets the receiving end of a Gal Giga reference, but also one of the most spammed bot tweets of all time. We also see the scouts make their grand and epic return as, now, war criminals, as well as more of the beast, jaw, cart, and armor titans and how they play off in a full-on brawl. As well as Armin making a devastating introduction and results in one of the most haunting finishers I've ever seen, with Eren finally gaining the upper hand against both the Warhammer and Jaw, the latter having his limb severed entirely and Eren forcing it to crush the former's nape and executing what is most famously known as the Nutcracker scene, drinking the blood of Lara Tiber. God damn, that is brutal. And yeah, the Warhammer Titan is literally just introduced so she could die. In fact, she didn't even have a name until this anime came out. But hey, Eren has a new power-up, so cool. And when the dust settles after the Warhammer has been lost, with the Titans now incapacitated, a lot of people have died, Zeke is captured, and everyone retreats. Except Gabby, and also Falco, who refuses to accept defeat and goes out of her way to sneak onto one of Paradis's airships and kills Sasha! Sasha! One of the most beloved characters from all the way back in Season 1! The funny girl! She dies! Yoko, I hope you're not watching this. What's interesting is that Sasha was actually meant to die a long time ago, only for Isayama's editor Shintaro Kawakubo to convince him to decide against it. Well, it appears only one man can only do so much. And as shocking as it is, it really builds upon the tension and thematic elements of the story, as at this point, there is really no telling who could die next. And with Sasha being such a joyful character, get her life just taken like that, really helps set the tone for what's to come, in that there is no more joy in this world, only death and destruction. It's also part of what makes Gabby such an interesting character, someone who is so full of hate to the point where she has no problem doing anything on her own terms, no hesitation whatsoever. In a way, she's also a lot like Eren, having to experience similar events he has. I guess it's a Braun thing. Also interesting how her character design kinda looks like Eren. Speaking of whom, we also see how the scouts react to his actions. Everyone speaks to him in a way that either shows contempt, concern, and even sorrow, questioning whether or not he has gone too far, or if his intentions are for the better. Even being blamed for Sasha's death and reminded that his actions killed so many innocent bystanders, even children. After this, we're treated to a flashback from 3 years before, where the scouts meet characters Yelena and Onyankopon for the first time. Deserters who claim to be anti-Marleyan volunteers who tell the scouts about the Rumbling, which was actually mentioned back in Willie's presentation, where the Titans from within the walls would be released and lay waste to the entire world. Yelena and Onyankopon are carrying out the duties of Zeke, who in actuality has an agenda of his own. While Marley wants to retake the founding titan that Eren now possesses as a means to prevent the Rumbling, Zeke wants to use it to liberate his people, the Eldians, being of royal blood. We are also introduced to the Hizuru, and it is revealed that Mikasa is a descendant of their shogun, as they also cooperate with the scouts and Marleyan renegades. Fast forward to the present, Eren recites the Ultraman Ace opening, yells at Hanchi because he's been listening to too much Linkin Park, hey man, I get it, and Gabby and Falco escape from their cell only to find themselves in a forest where they meet Kaya, who turns out to be the girl Sasha saved from Season 2. As she helps take them in, the Blouse family all talk about Sasha as Gabby just sits there, all shaken up, taking in the possibility that everything she's been told about the Eldians through propaganda is wrong. Oh yeah, and while all this is happening, Floch incites a nationalist uprising named after Eren. Yeah, remember Floch, the one guy who wanted Erwin to live after he was the sole survivor of that suicide charge? He's gone completely nuts. And Eren has gone completely AWOL at this point, and now the Scouts and Marleyan Renegades meet with the government to figure out how to keep Eren and Zeke from meeting one another. As it turns out, the latter plans to euthanize the entire Eldian race. Ymir is dead, Historia is pregnant, Pixis has a big head, up is down, left is right is wrong, Cole sucks, I'm an idiot,
I'm going insane.
I should be watching Godzilla vs. Megalon. There's a lot going on. We're gonna be here all day, so let's just move along. Oh, now Eren is severing all ties with his friends. And he even go as far as to say he always hated Mikasa for being a slave who knows nothing but to protect him. Look at her, she looks so sad. Meanwhile, Levi and a team of scouts are in a forest with Zeke. By the way, remember those Titans from the last half of Season 3 and the ones from Connie's home village? Well, turns out Zeke is able to weaponize his spinal fluid and turn people into pure Titans by screaming after they've ingested it either through breathing in gas or drinking it. Though this time around, Zeke's spinal fluid was put into a large supply of wine that is served to high-ranking officials. So, great. Now there's a lot of people who could wound up being Titans if Zeke did as little as slightly raise his voice in the right spot. Oh, and Levi and co. just so happen to have a case of one. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, Levi versus Zeke round 1 was pretty hype. Round 2 was, well, as you'd expect. But round 3, oh man. Reading this chapter, I felt a little bit of everything, as I was very much rooting for Levi to live, as there was a huge chance that he was going to die, being totally unprepared. Levi swings around the forest with his damnness to avoid getting eaten with way too many close calls for my taste. But through the power of Levi being Levi, he pulls through, takes down Zeke, and ties him up with a Thunder Spear. All seems hopeless for Zeke, who begins to reminisce about his life up to this point. We see that growing up, he formed a bond with a man named Xylomar, who looks an awful lot like live-action Attack on Titan screenwriter Tomohiro Machiyama. Xylomar was the former inheritor of the Beast Titan and was beyond willing to pass it down to Zeke. Zeke even wears his glasses in his honor. Wait a minute, didn't Zeke have an apple earlier? Ah, I see what y'all are doing. And then, well, I guess Levi is dead now. Alright, everyone is converging into Shinganshina. Eren stands his ground watching the forces come in his direction, with Reiner looking down upon him. This is it. All the pieces are coming into play. The moment we've been waiting for. Time for this epic showdown to begin. Oh, so we're gonna do that now. Okay, I guess. Attack on Titan the final season part 1 is pretty amazing. Despite its very problematic production, Mappa was able to deliver a piece of a greater story that was intense, complex, thrilling, engaging, and emotional. Say what you will about the animation, but the narrative was absolutely solid all around. Oh yeah, and how about that phenomenal score from Kota Yamamoto? But I can't fully gush now, because we're not done yet. Tune in later, when I cover Attack on Titan the final season, part 2. But what do you guys think? Is Attack on Titan peak, or is it actually mid? Is it both? Drop a comment below, and I want to give a shout out to my channel members and my Patreon supporters. If you like what you see, feel free to support the channel on Patreon, where you can get access to my Discord server, early access to videos, and exclusive content. Feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and... okay, I think it's time that I finally address the elephant in the room. So, it was around this time in the story where people, normally outsiders to Attack on Titan, started to get pretty skeptical about some things. Something just didn't seem right. The sudden shift to the characters who we believe to be the villains, their outfits that are very much World War II inspired, all the symbolism that is eerily reminiscent to Nazi Germany, and the main protagonist becoming the main villain who has his own cult of extremists and supremacists. People have started to suspect that the intentions of Attack on Titan's story may not be as innocent as initially thought. Basically, it is through these story elements that people have begun to view Attack on Titan as a story that comes off as anti-Semitic, pro-fascist, pro-nationalist, and pro-Nazism. Now, here's the thing. All media is subjective. We can make our own assessments based on what we experience, and while people are totally in the right to believe that, here's my take, and I'm probably gonna get a lot of heat from this, I personally don't find it as such, but I see why people do. Attack on Titan is a story that shows what happens when we are trapped in a world full of anger and hatred that is often rooted in pure ignorance. These characters are facing situations that are, on one hand, hard to comprehend, but are rooted in oppression, corruption, and prejudice. When it's revealed that humanity has always existed outside the walls and that Marley was using Paradis for experiments and invasions, which do draw parallels to Imperial Japan during World War II, with Unit 731 and the Nanking Massacre, there's quite a different number of reactions regarding that. When Eren leads the assault on Liberia, we really ask ourselves if his actions were in the right. Did so many innocent people have to pay their lives against their will for the things they had no say or part in? And for what? Why? It's all about emphasis, and Attack on Titan really emphasizes how wrong these decisions the characters make are. I mentioned wartime Japan earlier, and these parallels go way back near the beginning of the story. After the fall of Shiganshina, we see teenagers enlist into the military. Let me reiterate that. Teenagers enlist into the military. And around this point, as we continue forward, it's become clear that there is an air of blind optimism and a sense of hopelessness and powerlessness that the characters are completely oblivious to, right until they're all getting devoured. Much like how the Japanese Empire enforced this false belief that Japan would win the Second World War as this powerful nation when it was very clear that they were suffering major losses on their front. They were so desperate that they were even willing to draft children into their army. Through these parallels, Attack on Titan takes a hard stance against ideals that infringe upon human rights. It's anti-authority, anti-oppression, anti-prejudice, anti-war. And war is terrible. It makes people do terrible things for the sake of a belief that may or may not hold true. We may focus on characters like Reiner, who have directly and indirectly slaughtered God knows how many people, but he had a mission, orders to follow on top of his own endgame. And the same can be said for everyone else. Everyone is fighting their own battle to achieve what they view as peace, even if that idea of peace isn't universal, or is simply inhumane. Attack on Titan is a story about consequence too. While it's awesome seeing soldiers flying around in mobility gear, killing titans in the coolest way possible, there's always consequences. Let's take Mobile Suit Gundam for example. We can talk about all the cool robots and action scenes, but Gundam is a series that shows the consequences of these epic battles. No matter which one you're watching, for every person that is benefited, there is always one who suffers. Or, for an example that's in the series itself, let's take a look at Erwin's suicide charge. We all talk about how it's easily one of the biggest highlights of the entire story, but let's not forget that these characters were forced into this situation. They had no other option but to accept that they were all going to die, except Flock. Yeah, it's badass, but it's tragic. And the story goes out of its way to show that, because the death of Erwin and his squad proved to be such a devastating loss, with severe consequences that affect the story going forward. Though as much as we can talk about things in the story that counter the whole anti-Semitism argument, there's also supposed comments that creator Hajime Isayama may or may not have made. I say that because, for the most part, there's a private Twitter account that has made some anti-Semitic remarks a long time ago at this point. And people have speculated it's Isayama, but is it really him? Who knows for sure. One comment he definitely made, however, was on his blog in 2010, where he admitted to basing the character Dot Pixis off of Imperial General Yoshifuru Akiyama, who, on one hand, is viewed with respect as he's considered the father of Japanese cavalry, but was also involved in the colonization of Korea in 1910. And knowing what Japan did to Korea at the time would make Akiyama a legitimate war criminal. It's not so much like the Ishiro Honda debate where, yeah, he was a great film director, but he was also a manager at a comfort women's station as a soldier. Granted, many Japanese soldiers were drafted against their will and have shared distaste for the experience like Honda. Meanwhile, Akiyama was in a higher rank. Though we also have to consider that with Attack on Titan being anti-authority, Isayama depicts the government as corrupt, even if there are good people like Dot Pixis who carry out whatever orders are bestowed to him by superiors. It almost kind of makes you feel dirty thinking about it, but that's what Attack on Titan does. Also, creators do tend to put their beliefs in the media they produce, whether or not it's subtle. People thought Shin Godzilla was pro-nationalism with how the Japanese government takes matters in their own hands and stops Godzilla on their own to show the world that Japan can hold their own. Except they actually didn't, and had help from America, Germany, China, and France in the end. And both Hideaki Anno and Shinji Higuchi had a message that critiqued slow-moving bureaucracy in times of severe crisis, but gave insight on how Japan can improve as a nation regarding international relations and the handling of disasters. Hell, Ishiro Honda directed the original Godzilla and the Mysterians, films that address the ever-growing advancement of military science and comfort women in imperialism respectively. And there's Kihachi Okamoto, who directed wartime epics such as Japan's Longest Day and Battle of Okinawa. People have tried to claim Okamoto as pro-imperialist and pro-nationalist, when really, these films, no matter how beautifully crafted they are on a production storytelling standpoint, serve as reminders to never repeat the past, showcasing the tragedy and brutality of war, and not in a positive light by any means. I guess in the end, we just have to wait for the man himself to say something. It is a little confusing, and I can see where people are coming from, but I didn't want to go this whole video series without addressing it. It's very much a controversy that's among the overseas fandom, and not just the West, by the way. But nevertheless, I don't think it's something that should be downplayed or flat out ignored. Though I will say, if you do see anyone claiming Attack on Titan as something negative, don't bother. They have their reasons, and it really just amounts to an unfortunate coincidence. But that's my take on the matter. Hope to see y'all next time. Oh yeah, who the fuck is in charge of the merchandise?